Why did the general stop? He had walked past rows of soldiers 100 times before. Routine inspections, routine glances, routine nods. But this time, his stride faltered. Something in the corner of the armory pulled him back. She was sitting, cross-legged on the concrete floor, her rifle disassembled into neat, meticulous rows. To anyone else, she looked like a ghost, quiet, forgettable, half hidden behind racks of steel and oil-stained benches. Just another soldier lost in the rhythm of maintenance. But the general's eyes narrowed when he saw the badge on her chest. 3,200 meters. Confirmed. He froze. The world around him. Chatter of soldiers. Clatter of metal. Parts. The faint hum of fluorescent lights blurred into silence. Soldier. His voice cut through the noise. Sharper than he intended. That's impossible. For a heartbeat, nothing moved. She lifted her head slowly, calm, unhurried, as if she had been expecting the disbelief. Her eyes dark, steady, met his without hesitation. There was no pride there, no need for validation, only a quiet weight, like someone carrying too much history in too small a frame. "Sir," she said evenly. The shot was confirmed. Multiple observers recorded. Mission Command filed the documentation. Her voice was soft, almost detached, but there was something behind it. Something that made the general's chest tighten in a way he didn't understand. He had seen soldiers brag about impossible feats, boast about kills, wear their scars like medals. But she spoke with none of that. She spoke like someone stating the time of day, like someone haunted not by what she had achieved, but by what it had cost. And he noticed something else. She didn't stop cleaning. Hands moved with practiced precision. Wipe, inspect, reassemble. Every gesture controlled, almost ceremonial, as if the weapon wasn't just a tool, but something closer to a confidant. The Barrett 50 was a monster of steel and recoil. Most soldiers hated carrying it. Too heavy, too slow. But she treated it like glass, like it had been part of her life longer than her own shadow. The general stepped closer, his aide following with a curious frown. "Valdez, right?" he asked, scanning the name stitched above her pocket. "Yes, sir. Staff Sergeant Valdez." "Explain to me," he said carefully, lowering his voice. "How does someone make a shot at over 3,000 meters when most men struggle at half? That distance?" This time, she set the rifle part aside. She looked up, met his gaze, and for the first time, her hand stilled. "It isn't just a shot, sir. It's hours of patience. Wind in your face, silence in your chest, the earth moving under you while you pretend it's standing still." She paused, then added, softer, "And it's knowing when to breathe and when not to." There was no arrogance in her words, only memory. The general studied her, unsettled. He had commanded men for decades. He had seen courage, fear, desperation, but this was different. She spoke like someone who had lived in that silence longer than she had lived in the noise of normal life. Her aide leaned closer, whispering, "Sir, should I pull up her service record?" The general nodded absently, his eyes never leaving her. And as Luna Valdez lowered her gaze back to the weapon in her lap, her thoughts drifted, though she would never say them out loud. Not here, not with an audience. She remembered the mountain wind cutting through her uniform like knives. She remembered the stillness, the 4 hours lying prone, her heartbeat the loudest sound in the valley. She remembered the target, just a figure across a world of distance, holding lives hostage with one twitch of his finger. She remembered the choice, and she remembered pulling the trigger. The world had never gone that quiet again. But here, in the armory, she wore the silence like armor. She let them think what they wanted. Impossible, unrealistic, exaggerated. Let them whisper, let them doubt. Because part of her wanted it that way. It was easier to be underestimated, easier to disappear in the corners, into shadows, into the hum of fluorescent lights, easier than carrying the weight of being known. The aide's voice interrupted her thoughts. "General, her record's restricted." Multiple classified deployments, Ranger Regiment, Delta attachments, operations without listed details. His tone carried disbelief. Sniper school top scores. Advanced ballistic computation. Recon certifications I've never even seen. Before, the general frowned. He could feel something in his chest shift, an unease mixed with fascination. This wasn't just another soldier. This was a weapon the military had tried to bury in plain sight. "Staff Sergeant," he said slowly, "why are you here? Sitting in a corner cleaning a rifle like a junior armorer when your record reads like myth?" Luna looked at him. Her eyes were calm, but there was something sharp beneath the surface. "Because missions don't happen every day, sir, and when they don't, preparation is the mission." Her words hung in the air. They were simple, but they struck harder than he expected. The general wanted to push further, to ask her about the shot, to demand the details, but something in her gaze warned him, like looking over the edge of a cliff and realizing the ground beneath you wasn't as solid as you thought. And in that moment, he realized something about her. She wasn't proud of that badge. She was surviving it. The aide shifted uncomfortably, breaking the silence. "General, should we move on?" But Matthews didn't answer, not yet, because he couldn't shake one question echoing in his head. What did it cost her 3,200 meters away? Later that night, in the dim quiet of her barracks, Luna sat alone, her barrette resting across her knees. Outside, laughter drifted from other soldiers unwinding. Voices tangled with music, the rhythm of life moving forward. She didn't join them. She rarely did. Her hands moved over the weapon again, fingertips tracing the cold steel, as if memorizing it all over again. She wasn't obsessive, at least, not in the way they thought. This ritual wasn't about the rifle. It was about control, because control was the only thing that kept the memories from spilling over, the only thing that kept her from replaying the sound of that trigger breaking. The 4 seconds of flight time where the world balanced between life and death. And the aftermath she tried not to see whenever she closed her eyes. She had learned to live inside that silence, to wear it like skin, to let others mistake it for discipline, when really it was survival. But sometimes, when the lights dimmed and the bass grew quiet, she asked herself a question she never dared speak aloud. If she missed that shot, if she hadn't pulled it off, would she be more human than she felt now? Her chest tightened. She forced the thought away, breathing slow, steady, the way she had taught herself on windswept ridges and dust-choked deserts. Discipline, control, preparation. It was the only way she knew how to live. And yet, somewhere, deep down, part of her longed for something the rifle couldn't give her. Recognition, maybe understanding, or perhaps something simpler, peace. But peace never came at 3,000 meters. Peace never came for people like her. So she kept cleaning, because tomorrow, someone might ask the impossible of her again, and she had to be ready. Have you ever walked past someone barely noticing them, only to later realize they carried a story that could shatter the limits of what you thought possible? That was Luna Valdez, a ghost in the armory, a whisper in the ranks, a soldier who lived in silence, because silence was the only place she could breathe. And somewhere, deep inside her, she wondered, what would happen the day someone truly listened? What did it take to convince a man who had seen everything? General Matthews wasn't easily impressed. He had commanded divisions, watched men rise and fall under fire, and signed orders that carved history in silence. Yet he found himself thinking about Hervé, the quiet soldier in the corner of the armory. The impossible number stitched into a badge too small to hold its weight. 3,200 meters, it haunted him. The next morning, he called his aide into his office. "Harrison, arrange a range test. I want Staff Sergeant Valdez. On the line, I want to see for myself." The aide hesitated, shuffling through digital files on his tablet. "Sir, the longest facility we've got here is 1,200 meters. That's barely a third of her claimed distance. Then 1,200 will do. Matthews' voice was firm. If she can't prove herself at that, we don't need to discuss legends. But a part of him already knew she would. He had seen it in her eyes, the calm steadiness of someone who had lived longer in silence than in celebration. 2 days later, the extended range at Camp Liberty was cleared. Every detail coordinated with military precision. A handful of senior officers arrived, some curious, others skeptical. Soldiers lined the berms in silence, murmuring about the mysterious sergeant whispered to have made the impossible shot. Luna arrived early. She always did. She carried the Barrett in its case, along with a pack heavier than most men would choose to carry. Setting her equipment down, she began laying out instruments with a ritualistic care. Wind meters, temperature gauges, ballistic calculators, optics lenses wrapped in cloth like fragile bones. It wasn't the weapon that made the difference. It was everything around it. Matthews approached, his expression unreadable. Staff Sergeant, the target is set at 1,200 meters. Clean hit center mass. That's all I want to see. Yes, sir. She replied simply, but inside, her pulse tapped a quieter rhythm. This wasn't combat. This wasn't necessity. This was spectacle. And spectacle, in her world, carried danger, because people didn't understand what a shot meant. They didn't understand what it took to wait 4 hours without moving, or the stillness it demanded inside your soul, or the responsibility of knowing that your decision at distance could save or end the lives of those who never even knew you existed. Spectacle reduced all of that to applause, to proof, to performance. She hated it, but she would do it, because in the end, preparation was obedience, and obedience was survival. She checked her instruments again, noting the subtle shifts of wind. Between her and the target, 1,200 meters wasn't long in her world, but it was enough to make lesser shooters sweat. The general stood behind her, watching every motion. Walk me through it, Valdez. Her hands moved without hesitation. She held up the anemometer. Let the digital numbers flicker. Wind speed 3 knots, drifting west, adjusting hold. Air density, altitude stable. Temperature gradient negligible. She set it down. Consulted the small device strapped to her wrist. Ballistic solution adjusted for spindrift. Coriolis effect at this latitude is minor, but accounted for. Her voice carried no embellishment, no drama, only calculation. When she settled into position, the world narrowed. The chatter of officers blurred. The rustle of boots, the creak of gear, all of it faded. There was only her breath, slow and steady. The weight of the rifle pressed into her shoulder. The glass of the scope drew. Her eye forward, compressing the world into one line, one target, one truth. She exhaled. The shot cracked. A thunderclap. The Barrett's recoil rippled through her. A familiar violence. A reminder that precision was always born from force. Target hit center mass, the range safety officer called. His voice almost surprised. Matthews lifted his binoculars, confirming for himself a perfect shot. Clean, unforgiving. He lowered the glass slowly. Again, he ordered. Luna adjusted. Breathed, fired, another clean strike. Again, every round. Tore into the same narrow grouping until the paper at 1,200 meters looked less like a target and more like a single wound. The officers behind Matthews shifted, murmurs rippling among them. Some shook their heads, others fell silent. Harrison scribbled furiously on his tablet, his face pale. General, I've never seen anything like this, but Matthews wasn't listening. He was watching her. She didn't flinch, didn't celebrate, didn't even glance back to see their faces. Her eyes stayed forward, steady, scanning the air, the ground. The way wind curled like invisible fingers. Every shot was just another line in a pattern no one else could see, and he realized this wasn't performance for her. This wasn't proof. This was prayer. When she finally lowered the rifle, Matthews stepped closer. Valdez, you've made your point. She looked at him, calm as ever. "Sir, this isn't my point. It's just 1,200 meters," her words struck him harder than the shots, because she was right. What he had just witnessed, what already looked beyond human to his eyes, was only a fraction of what she carried inside her. And for the first time, he believed the badge, but belief carried its own weight. That night, Luna lay awake in her bunk, the echoes of the demonstration lingering in her chest. Soldiers had clapped her on the back, some with awe, others with envy. Officers had whispered about legend and record and capability, but she felt none of it. No pride, no relief, only the familiar heaviness. She turned her face into the thin pillow, eyes burning against the darkness, because what they celebrated was what she carried in silence. They wanted proof of a miracle. She remembered the price of it. 4 hours of stillness, 4 hours of doubt. The faces of hostages she never met, whose lives balanced on her decision. The silence after the shot when the valley fell still, and she knew the man on the other side would never draw another breath. They didn't cheer for that. They didn't cheer for the weight that followed her into every night, into every quiet corner where she cleaned her rifle and tried to convince herself that she was more than a single number sewn onto a badge. Her hands clenched into the sheets. If they knew how little she felt human after that shot, would they still whisper her name like a myth? The barracks were silent around her. A single fan whirred overhead, blades chopping the heat into uneven waves. She closed her eyes, forced her breathing steady, counted heartbeats the way she once counted seconds across a mountain valley. Control, discipline, silence, that was how you survived. But the thought kept pressing at her chest, no matter how she fought it. What if survival wasn't living? The next morning, Matthew summoned her to his office. He didn't waste time. "Valdez, I want your complete file, all of it, no redactions." Her posture stiffened. "Sir, that requires clearance I don't have." "I'll get it," he said firmly. "What I saw yesterday isn't just talent. It's something else, and I need to understand it." For a long moment, she stood in silence. Then she nodded once. "Understood, sir." As she turned to leave, Matthew stopped her. His voice was quieter this time. "Staff Sergeant, tell me one thing. When you took that 3,000-meter shot, what did it feel like?" She froze. The memory cut through her, sharp as glass. She could almost hear the wind again, taste the dust in her mouth, feel the weight of the trigger pressing back against her fingertip. And then she looked at him. "It felt," she said slowly, "like there was no going back." She saluted, turned, and walked away. Matthew sat alone in his office long after, the echo of her words sinking like stone into the quiet. No going back. What kind of soldier leaves even generals in the dark? That was the question clawing at Matthews as he pushed through weeks of bureaucracy, signed forms he barely understood, and pulled favors that would have been unthinkable under any other circumstance. The military was a machine of locked doors and guarded corridors. But Luna Valdez's record wasn't locked. It was buried. When the file finally opened, Matthews sat back in his chair, reading line after line in silence. Her story didn't begin with myths. It began with numbers, scores at basic training so high instructors flagged her within days. Marksmanship records shattered with an ease that unsettled entire ranges. Evaluators describing her as preternatural calm under stress, and possessing an instinctive grasp of ballistics beyond measurable standards. But that was only the beginning. He skimmed through names of schools most soldiers never heard of, let alone attended. Advanced sniper programs tucked under layers of secrecy, courses in physics, meteorology, and computation attached not to standard infantry pipelines, but to organizations that only existed in whispers. And then came the deployments. Matthews slowed his reading. His chest tightened. Afghanistan, Iraq, Horn of Africa. Not the standard tours, not the documented battles. Her records were marked with designations he hadn't seen in 25 years of service. Special Access Operation, eyes only. by order of command authority. Every mission told the same story. Impossible engagements, targets neutralized at distances that made doctrine irrelevant. Situations where conventional units couldn't move without catastrophe. And Luna had been inserted like a scalpel where sledgehammers failed. One entry caught his eye: hostage compound, mountainous terrain. No viable assault room. A hostel holding civilians with the power to collapse an entire diplomatic mission if negotiations failed. Solution: extreme range precision. Outcome: 3,200 meters. One shot. Hostages safe. Operation success. Matthews leaned back. The words echoing in his mind. It wasn't just the number that staggered him. It was the cold brevity of it. A life-altering act condensed into a single sentence. Filed between lines of redacted paragraphs and codenames, he closed the file slowly, rubbing his temples. Legends weren't built from paperwork. Legends lived in the silence between lines. And Luna, whatever she carried, was more silence than anyone he had ever met. While Matthews wrestled with records, Luna sat alone again in the armory. The Barrett was disassembled on the table before her, pieces laid out with surgical order. To anyone watching, it was routine. To her, it was ritual. Because when her hands moved, her mind stilled, and she needed stillness. The demonstration had unsettled her. Too many eyes, too much attention. It wasn't supposed to be about applause. It was about survival, about preparation, about staying invisible until the one moment when invisibility saved lives. But invisibility was slipping away. Word had spread. Officers nodded differently when she passed. Soldiers whispered when they thought she wasn't listening. And though they didn't say it to her face, she could hear it in their tones. Ghost, legend. The woman with the impossible shot. She clenched the rag in her hand tighter. If they only knew. If they only knew the weight of pulling a trigger and erasing someone across miles. If they only knew the way silence after a shot could feel heavier than gunfire. If they only knew that sometimes she wondered whether being invisible wasn't a curse, but the only way to keep breathing. She didn't want to be their legend. She wanted to be left alone, but the world wasn't going to let her. Not anymore. A week later, Matthews requested her presence in a secure room deep inside the compound. She walked in, posture straight, uniform immaculate, but eyes watchful. He gestured for her to sit. "Staff Sergeant, I've read your file." Her jaw tightened. Though she didn't speak, "You've been deployed in operations I didn't know existed. Your training alone looks like the resume of 3 soldiers combined. And that shot." He paused, searching for words. That shot should be impossible. Luna's expression didn't change. "Sir, it was possible because the conditions aligned. Terrain, elevation, weather, preparation." "Preparation," Matthews repeated. 4 hours in position." "Yes, sir. 4 hours." He leaned forward. "What goes through your mind when you're lying there, waiting, knowing the world depends on you not blinking at the wrong time?" Her gaze flickered for a moment. Her silence deepened, and then she said softly, "Mostly, that I can't let myself be human until it's over." The words cut deeper than he expected. He studied her, realizing that her calm wasn't serenity. It was survival. He spoke carefully. "You saved lives that day. Hostages, fellow soldiers. Your shot made the difference." But she didn't flinch, didn't smile. "Sir, saving them doesn't erase the fact that someone else didn't go home. Balance sheets don't make peace." Matthews sat back, unsettled again. He wanted to tell her she was wrong. That duty justified cost, that her service was extraordinary, invaluable. But the look in her eyes stopped him, because she already knew all of that. And none of it healed her. Later that evening, Matthews joined a classified briefing with General Patricia Stone, one of the few officers with clearance above his own. "Matthews," she said firmly, "what you've stumbled on isn't rumor. Valdez is one of our most valuable assets. She operates at the edge of what's humanly possible. Her assignments aren't tactical, they're strategic." Matthews frowned. Then why is she buried at a forward base? Cleaning rifles in a corner? Stone's expression was hard, because visibility is a liability. You think a soldier like her can live openly? The moment she becomes a name instead of a ghost, she's a target. For enemies, for politics, for exploitation, Matthews exhaled. Slowly, the truth pressing into him, he understood now. The badge, the silence, the shadows. She wasn't hidden because she lacked value. She was hidden because she was too valuable. Stone leaned forward. Luna Valdez isn't just a sniper. She's a force multiplier. Her existence changes what's possible. That's why she lives in shadows. Because some capabilities are too dangerous to parade in daylight. Matthews thought of her words. I can't let myself be human until it's over. And he wondered, not for the first time, what that did to a person. That night, in the barracks, Luna lay awake again. She could feel the weight of attention growing, the invisible spotlight pressing into her corners. Matthews had seen her file. He had asked questions she didn't want to answer, and deep inside, she feared the one thing she never admitted aloud. The more they looked at her, the less she remembered who she was outside the rifle. When had she last laughed without feeling guilty? When had she last looked at her reflection and seen something more than steel and silence? Her hands curled against her stomach. The answer came too quickly. She couldn't remember. Sometimes, the greatest battles weren't fought at distance. They were fought in silence, and Luna Valdez, legend, ghost, impossible shot, was still waiting to see if she could win hers. What kind of mission demands the impossible? That was the question whispered across briefing tables when Luna's name appeared on the orders. Soldiers leaned closer. Officers exchanged uneasy glances, because if Staff Sergeant Valdez was being pulled, it meant something had gone wrong, terribly wrong. The operation came coded in red. Hostage recovery, foreign soil, high political stakes. A militant commander had taken captives, aid workers. Civilians, one American hidden inside a fortified compound deep in the mountains. Conventional assault would mean disaster. Airstrikes risked killing those they were meant to save. So the plan shrank to a single point, one shot, and Luna. She boarded the transport plane at dawn. Gear strapped tight, Barrett locked in its case. Beside her boots, around her, the team spoke in clipped sentences. Voices tight with nerves. She listened, silent. She always did. Silence was her shield. As the engines roared, she closed her eyes, letting the sound of metal and wind drown her thoughts. But it wasn't enough. The memories pushed through anyway. The last shot, the valley, the silence that followed. Her chest tightened. She opened her eyes. Focus. Not then, not now. Preparation was survival. She checked her gear again, hands moving with mechanical certainty. Scope alignment, wind meters, ballistic calculators. Each piece accounted for, each detail memorized. The ritual anchored her. The ritual reminded her she wasn't just carrying steel, she was carrying lives. But in the corner of her mind, a whisper persisted. What if you miss? Hours later, they arrived at the overwatch point. The mountains rose like jagged teeth, air thin and sharp. The compound sat below, walls of stone and rusted steel, guards moving in restless patterns. She lay prone, body pressed into the earth, scope sweeping across the valley. Target. Confirmed. Distance. 2,800 meters. Wind. Variable. Inconsistent. Not as far as her record, but still near the edge of possibility. She adjusted her scope, fingers steady. Though her pulse betrayed her, every breath fogged. The edge of her glasses, every second. The world seemed to hold its breath with her. The radio crackled softly. Overwatch. Do you have eyes? She clicked once. Yes. Hostages inside. Target moving between buildings. Wait for command. She exhaled slowly, pressing her cheek tighter against the stock. The rifle was heavy, but she welcomed the weight. It anchored her to the ground. To the moment, the weight meant something else too. Responsibility. Through the scope, she saw the commander broad-shouldered, face hidden under cloth, rifle slung casually as he barked orders. She didn't hear his words, but she saw the fear ripple through the hostages when he gestured. Sharp and threatening, her jaw clenched. This was why she was here. This was why she endured the silence. The training, the endless preparation, not for glory, not for badges, for this, to stop what others couldn't. Still, doubt whispered. What if the wind shifts? What if your finger twitches? What if the price of failure is written in their blood? She pushed it down, breathing steady. Control, always control. Minutes stretched into hours. The sun burned overhead. Her body ached from stillness, muscles screaming, but she didn't move. Couldn't. Not until the moment came, and then it did. The commander stepped into the open, hostages forced to kneel behind him. He raised his rifle, pointing at one of them. A woman. The radio flared. Overwatch. Confirmed target. Her crosshairs steadied, breath slowed, time collapsed. Take the shot. The world narrowed into silence. Her finger pressed. The rifle roared. Recoil slammed into her shoulder. Through the scope, she saw the figure fall cut from the frame in an instant. Dust lifted. Hostages flinched. Guards scattered in confusion. The radio burst alive. Target down. Move, move. Assault teams surged forward, closing on the compound. Gunfire erupted below. Chaos spreading. But Luna stayed still, scope scanning, eyes hard. She tracked movements, eliminated threats as they appeared. One shot, then another. Not glory, necessity, minutes. Felt like lifetimes then. Hostages secure, exfil commencing. Her body sagged against the ground. Breath shuddering. She had done it. Again. The operation was a success, but in her chest, success felt like stone. Hours later, on the transport home, soldiers cheered. Relief buzzed through the cabin. Adrenaline released in laughter and backslaps. She sat apart, silent, barrett across her knees. No one looked at her. Not really. To them, she was the shadow on the ridge, the hand of fate they never saw. And part of her preferred it that way. But when she closed her eyes, she saw the moment. Again, the commander's fall. The way the hostages flinched as if death had grazed them too. She saved them. She knew that. Logic told her the truth. But logic never quieted the silence after a shot. She leaned her head back against the vibrating hull, eyes heavy, and for the first time, she wondered not about the mission, not about the rifle, but about herself. How many more shots could she take before there was nothing left of her beyond the silence? Back at base, Matthews received the after-action report. Success, hostages safe, target neutralized. Minimal casualties. He should have been relieved. He should have been proud. But all he could think about was Luna. He remembered her words, I can't let myself be human until it's over. And he realized with a chill that for her, over never came. That night, Luna returned to the armory, alone. The Barrett lay in pieces before her again, her hands moving automatically. Clean. Inspect, reassemble. It wasn't maintenance anymore. It was penance, because sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it just acts. And sometimes action left scars no one could see. She set the bolt aside, staring at her reflection in the polished steel. A stranger stared back, and for the first time, she whispered into the silence, so low no one could hear. Who am I without this rifle? The silence gave her no answer. What happens when the strongest soldier begins to fracture? That was the question Matthews couldn't silence. The report said victory. The charge said efficiency. Commanders congratulated one another in quiet rooms, numbers filed neatly into columns that made chaos look orderly, but none of that told him what he needed to know. What was it doing to her? Luna sat on her bunk, boots still laced, uniform damp with sweat from the day's drills. She hadn't undressed. She hadn't eaten. The rifle case leaned against the wall like a shadow. Her teammates were laughing in the next room. the muffled rise and fall of voices carrying through thin metal walls. She listened, not envying them, not resenting them, just listening. The laughter reminded her of a sound she couldn't produce anymore. She rubbed her temples, eyes closing. She tried to push the memories away, but they crowded in, sharp and merciless. The commander's body falling, the flinch of the hostage, as if she too had been struck. The way silence swallowed the valley afterward, thick and endless. Her breath hitched. She clenched her fists. Control, always control. She had built her life on stillness, on breath measured, movements calculated. But in the quiet of her bunk, stillness was a prison, and there was no escape. She whispered to herself, almost pleading, "You did it." They lived. It mattered. But the words felt hollow, because for every hostage that lived, someone else didn't. And her finger had been the dividing line. Matthews sat across from General Stone again, her office dim, lit only by the glow of secure monitors. "She's breaking," Matthews said bluntly. Stone's eyes narrowed. "What makes you say that?" "I've seen her. The way she carries herself. The silence isn't discipline anymore. It's weight." Stone leaned back, fingers steepled. "Every asset carries weight. She's trained to bear it." "Trained?" Matthews shook his head. "She's human, and humans crack. We're leaning on her too heavily." Stone's voice hardened. "Do you think the enemy cares about her humanity? She delivers results no one else can. That's the reality of warfare. We don't get to choose our tools. We use the ones that work." Matthews bristled. "She's not a tool." Stone met his gaze evenly. "Then tell me, what would you rather do? Send 30 men into a suicide assault? Call in an airstrike and bury the hostages too? Or let one soldier carry the shot that saves them all?" Matthews didn't answer, because he knew the truth. The truth was that Luna made the impossible possible, and because of that, command would keep asking, again and again, until she broke. That night, Luna found herself walking the perimeter of the base, long after lights out. The desert air was cool, stars spread in silent constellations overhead. She walked with her hands in her pockets, boots crunching gravel, every step slow, deliberate. She wasn't supposed to be out here, but the barracks walls closed in on her, and silence pressed too heavy indoors. Out here, the silence at least felt wide. She stopped by the chain-link fence, pressing her palms against the cold wire. Beyond, the desert stretched forever, empty, waiting. Her throat tightened. She wanted to scream into it, to break the quiet, with something raw, something human, but no sound came. Instead, her chest heaved, breath catching as the question rose again, unrelenting. Who am I without this rifle? No answer, only stars. She clenched the fence tighter, knuckles whitening, and deep inside, fear whispered. What if there was nothing left beyond the rifle? Nothing but silence, endless and consuming. The next morning, Matthews found her in the armory again. She was hunched over the barrett, parts spread like puzzle pieces, a movement slower than usual, less precise. He stopped at the doorway. "Watching, Staff Sergeant?" She looked up. Her eyes were tired, shadows etched beneath them, but her voice was steady. "Sir." He stepped closer. "How do you carry it?" Her brow furrowed slightly. "Carry what, sir?" "The weight of every shot, of every life balanced on your trigger." Her gaze lowered back to the weapon. For a long time, she said nothing. Then quietly, "I don't carry it, not really, I just put it down for a while, and when the next mission comes, I pick it up again." Matthews felt something twist in his chest. "And when there are no missions?" Her hands froze on the bolt. She didn't look at him. "That's when it feels the heaviest, later, in the officers' mess." Matthews sat alone with his thoughts around him. Conversations buzzed about upcoming deployments, logistics, training schedules, normalcy, but he couldn't shake her words. She wasn't invincible. She wasn't untouchable. She was a soldier carrying more than anyone should, buried under silence because command needed her hidden, because the world needed her shots more than it cared about her soul. And for the first time in his long career, Matthews asked himself a question that gnawed at him like rust. At what point did saving lives cost too much of one? That night, Luna dreamed. She was back in the mountains, wind tearing at her face, the rifle steady in her hands. She pulled the trigger. The target fell, silence. But this time, when she looked through the scope, it wasn't the commander on the ground. It was herself. She jolted awake, chest heaving, sweat soaking her shirt. Her hands trembled against the thin blanket. She pressed her palms over her face, forcing her breath steady. Just a dream. Just a dream. But deep down, she knew it wasn't just a dream. It was her fear given shape. And fear, she had learned, was sometimes more dangerous than bullets. The next morning, she put on her uniform, strapped her boots, clipped her badge into place. To the world, she looked the same. Calm, silent, professional. But inside, cracks were spreading, and she wondered how. Many more missions before they split her apart? Sometimes, the battlefield isn't a valley or a compound or a target in your scope. Sometimes, it's inside you. And Luna Valdez, quiet, disciplined, legendary, was beginning to realize she was standing on one she might not win. How many times can one person be asked to carry the impossible? That was the question Luna couldn't silence as she stared at her orders. Another mission, another valley, another shot that would decide lives. Her hands didn't tremble when she read the details, but her chest tightened. She folded the paper carefully, sliding it into her pocket. To anyone watching, she was composed. To herself, she was unraveling. The briefing was short, clinical, stripped of emotion. A convoy of insurgents moving through the desert, escorting a high-value target. Intelligence indicated a planned attack that could destabilize the entire region. The convoy was mobile, heavily armed, shielded by terrain. Airstrike was denied. Too much risk to civilian villages nearby. Ground assault impossible without severe losses. Solution. Sniper Overwatch translation. Luna. Matthews sat at the back of the room, eyes on her as the details scrolled across the screen. He didn't miss the way her jaw tightened, the subtle flicker of something in her gaze. She didn't speak. She never did during briefings, but he wondered what she wasn't saying. Hours later, the helicopter blades roared overhead, carrying her and a small support team to a ridgeline overlooking the convoy's route. The desert stretched endless below, sand whipping in restless gusts. She lay prone. Barrett pressed into the dirt. Scope trained on the valley. Distance, 2,400 meters. Wind, variable, unpredictable. Target, not yet visible. She adjusted her scope, calibrated her devices, noted every flicker of wind. Hands steady, breath controlled on the surface. She was as she had always been, but inside, cracks widened, because this time, the silence wasn't just heavy. It was hostile. Her thoughts whispered louder than the wind. Another trigger pull, another shadow erased, another weight added to the pile you pretend doesn't exist. Her chest tightened. She forced her breathing steady. She had done this 100 times. She could do it again, but this time felt different. The radio crackled. Convoy in sight. Targets confirmed. Stand by. Through the scope, dust rose behind the line of vehicles crawling through the valley. Armored pickups, machine guns mounted in the back. Guards scanning the horizon, unaware of the eye watching them from miles away. And then, there at the target, a man stepping from the center vehicle, scanning the terrain. Her crosshairs found him instantly. The world narrowed. This was it, but a finger froze on the trigger. The silence pressed harder, suffocating. She could see the man's face through the scope. Not a blur, not a shadow, a face, flesh and bone, alive. Her chest heaved. Her heartbeat thundered in her ears. What if this is the one that breaks you? What if pulling this trigger is the moment you disappear? For good? Her finger trembled. Overwatch. Take the shot. She didn't move. Overwatch. Confirm. Still frozen. The man adjusted his jacket, barking orders to the guards. He wasn't holding a hostage. He wasn't threatening anyone in sight. Not yet, but intelligence said he would. Intelligence said his plans would kill hundreds. Still, he looked human through the glass. Too human. Luna's breath shook. She closed her eyes, steadying, discipline, control, silence, when she opened them. Again, her finger pressed the trigger. The rifle roared. The man fell. The radio erupted. Target down. Repeat. Target down. The convoy scattered in panic, vehicles swerving, guards firing into the empty horizon. Her support team called in confirmation. The operation was a success, but Luna lay motionless, her cheek pressed against the scope, because for the first time, success didn't feel like survival. It felt like loss. Back at base, Matthews waited in the command tent as the team returned. Soldiers filed in, dusty and weary, but relieved. Then she entered. Her uniform was the same. Her face was the same. But her eyes, something in them had changed. She saluted, reported cleanly, voice steady, to anyone else. She looked untouched, but Matthews saw it, the flicker, the fracture. After the debrief, he caught her outside. Valdez. She turned, posture rigid. Sir. You hesitated. Her jaw clenched. Only for a moment, sir. That moment could have cost the mission. She looked him in the eye. For the first time, there was heat there. Or maybe it saved me. He froze. She held his gaze a second longer, then turned and walked away. That night, Luna sat alone again, rifle in pieces across the table. Her hands moved slower than ever. The parts blurred. Her chest felt heavy, as if the silence had finally settled. Into her lungs, she thought of the man's face through the scope, not as an enemy, not as a target, as a man. She whispered, barely audible, I can't keep doing this. And the silence, merciless as ever, whispered back, yes you can, because they'll keep asking. And you'll keep saying yes. Her hands trembled. For the first time, she almost dropped. The bolt. Matthews stood at his window, watching the desert under moonlight. He had commanded thousands of soldiers. He had buried too many to count. He had told himself that sacrifice was necessary. But Luna wasn't like the others. She wasn't dying in battle. She was dying in silence, one shot at a time. And for the first time in his long career, Matthews wasn't sure if asking her to keep going was leadership or cruelty. The next morning, Luna dressed in her uniform, clipped the badge to her chest, and walked into the day as if nothing had changed. But she knew something inside her had shifted. The silence she once controlled was beginning to control her, and she wondered, how many more missions until it consumed her completely? Sometimes, the battlefield isn't measured in meters. Sometimes, it's measured in how much of yourself you can lose before there's nothing left. And Luna Valdez was closer to that line than ever. What happens when silence finally breaks? That was the question hanging over Luna's orders as she stood in the briefing room, expression calm, hands steady at her sides. Another mission, another name on a classified file, another line that would soon become a number. But this one was different. Everyone knew it. The target wasn't hiding in a valley or traveling in a convoy. He was deep inside a fortified village, surrounded by civilians. Any mistake, any miscalculation would mean lives lost, and Luna was the only option. Again, Matthews watched her from across the room. Unease gnawing at him, she looked the same. Precise, disciplined, unshakable. But he knew better. He had seen the cracks. He wanted to stand, to speak, to tell the others they were breaking her. But his words froze, crushed under the weight of command. Because they were right. She was the only option, and he hated himself for knowing it. The night before the mission, Luna sat in the armory, her buried in pieces across the table. Her hands moved automatically, cloth sliding over steel. Fingers tracing grooves worn familiar, but her mind was elsewhere. She thought of the man in the convoy, the hesitation, the way his face wouldn't leave her. And she thought of what tomorrow would demand. Another shot, another silence. Her chest tightened until she could barely breathe. For the first time, she admitted it aloud. "I don't want to do this anymore." Her voice was small, breaking in. The empty room, but the rifle said nothing back. The next day, the world tilted into motion. Helicopters dropped her on a ridgeline overlooking the village. The desert heat shimmered, air trembling with waves of dust. Through her scope, she saw the compound. Stone walls, narrow alleys, civilians moving between doorways, children playing. In the dirt, and among them her target, a man moving with casual arrogance. Confident in the shield of innocence around him, her crosshairs tracked him. The world narrowed. Distance, 1,900 meters. Wind, steady, but shifting in bursts. Risk, unbearable. Her finger rested on the trigger and froze. The radio crackled. Overwatch, confirmed target. Her chest rose and fell. Her finger wouldn't move. Overwatch, take. The shot. She swallowed, breath shaking. Through the scope, she saw the man laugh at something a guard said. He leaned against the wall, unconcerned. And then a child ran past him, chasing a ball. Her breath caught. Her finger recoiled from the trigger. "No shot," she whispered. "Repeat, Overwatch?" She pressed her radio tighter. "No shot." Civilian proximity, static silence, then the voice sharper. "Overwatch. This is a direct order. Take the shot." Her heart pounded, her vision blurred. She couldn't. Not like this, not with a child one step away. She clenched her eyes shut. The silence roared in her head. When she opened them again, the man had moved deeper into the alley. Out of her angle, opportunity gone. The radio exploded with voices, anger, panic, demands. But Luna lay motionless, cheek pressed against the scope, breath trembling. She hadn't failed technically. She had chosen, and that choice would not be forgiven. Hours later, the mission collapsed, the target escaped. Civilians shielded him, then scattered, leaving assault teams with no clean entry. By nightfall, the opportunity was lost. The operation was declared compromised. And in the debrief, Luna sat silent as commanders dissected failure, voices sharp with accusation. She said nothing. She didn't defend herself. She didn't explain, because how could she explain that it wasn't her scope that wavered? It was her humanity that refused to die. Matthews found her afterward, sitting alone outside the barracks, helmet on the ground, face hidden in her hands. He sat beside her, quiet. "You disobeyed an order," he said finally. Her voice cracked when she answered. "I saw the child." He nodded slowly. He had suspected. "You know what command will say," he continued. "That you cost us the mission. Your hesitation put lives at risk." Her eyes lifted. Wet with something he had never seen in her before. Not steel, not silence, fragility. "I don't care what they say," she whispered. "I couldn't do it." And Matthews felt something shift inside him, a truth he had ignored for too long. She wasn't a weapon. She was a person, and they had used her until she nearly broke. That night, she lay awake in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. For the first time in years, she felt the tears come, not violent, not loud, just silent, like everything else in her life. Even her breaking was quiet, and as the tears slid into her hair, she whispered to herself, "I'm not a ghost. I'm still here. I have to be." But she didn't know if she believed it. The next morning, Matthews stood before a panel of senior officers. Their voices were sharp, clipped, filled with anger. "Your sniper disobeyed a direct order. She compromised the mission. She's become unreliable." Matthews's jaw tightened. For a long time, he listened. Then he said, firmly, "No, she's become human." The room fell silent. And for the first time in his career, Matthews didn't care about protocol, because he realized the truth. Sometimes the bravest act wasn't pulling the trigger. Sometimes it was refusing to. Luna Valdez had carried silence her entire career. But in the village, when the child ran past her target, she had chosen something else. She had chosen to be human again. And though command would call it failure, Matthews knew better. It was the first time silence had saved her, instead of burying her. What happens after a soldier refuses the shot? That was the question echoing through Camp Liberty in the days that followed. The mission report said failure. The panel said disobedience. The whispers said she had broken. But Luna said nothing. She moved through the base like a shadow, saluting when required, following routine, cleaning her rifle in silence. On the surface, nothing had changed, but beneath the calm, something had shifted so profoundly that she wasn't sure who she was anymore. Matthews watched her from a distance. Unease pressing into him, he saw the way soldiers looked at her differently, now some with suspicion, others with quiet sympathy, but none of them knew the truth. None of them had seen what he had seen in her eyes. He remembered the way her voice cracked when she said, "I couldn't do it," and he realized that her refusal hadn't been weakness. It had been strength, the kind the military rarely rewarded, but the kind humanity couldn't survive without. Still, command wanted blood. The hearing was swift. A small room, cold fluorescent lights, officers seated in judgment. Luna stood at attention, uniform perfect, eyes forward. Staff Sergeant Valdez, you were ordered to engage a target. You refused. Do you dispute this? No, sir. You understand refusal constitutes disobedience of a direct order under combat conditions. Yes, sir. The senior officer leaned forward. Explain yourself. Her throat tightened. She could feel every eye drilling into her. But her voice, though quiet, did not shake. There was a child, too close. One step between the target and collateral. I assessed the risk as unacceptable. The room was silent. The officer's eyes narrowed. Collateral is inevitable in war. You know this. Yes, sir, she said softly. But inevitability isn't the same as choice. The words hung heavy, the kind that couldn't be erased once spoken. Matthews sat at the back, fists clenched. For the first time in years, he felt proud not of a soldier, but of a person. The decision came down harsh, as expected. She would not be court-martialed. Her record was too valuable, her skills too rare, but her future would be re-evaluated. Reassignment, observation, a quiet exile, on paper. She was still in uniform. In reality, she was already being erased that night. She sat alone on the edge of her bunk, badge in her hand, 3,200 meters. Confirmed, the number felt heavier than ever. Not because it proved what she could do, but because it had come to define her. Reduce her, trap her. She turned it over in her fingers, metal catching the faint light. And then, slowly she unclipped it from her uniform, set it on the nightstand. For the first time since earning it, she let herself imagine who she might be. Without it, the thought terrified her. But it also gave her a flicker of something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Matthews found her in the armory days later. The Barrett was laid out before her as always, but this time, she wasn't cleaning she was just staring at it. He stepped inside, closing the door softly behind him. Staff Sergeant. She looked up, eyes tired but clearer than before. Sir. He studied her, then spoke carefully. You made the right call. Her lips pressed tight. Command doesn't think so. Command sees numbers, charts, objectives. He paused. I see a soldier who remembered what it means to be human. For the first time, her eyes softened. Do you really believe that, sir? Yes, he said firmly, because I've been in this uniform for decades. And I've forgotten too many times myself. You reminded me. She looked back at the rifle. Then, why does it feel like I've lost everything? Because they don't reward humanity. Matthews admitted. But that doesn't make it wrong. Weeks passed. Luna continued her routine, but something had changed. She no longer poured herself into the rifle as before. She cleaned it, maintained it, respected it, but it no longer consumed her. Instead, she began running laps around the base again, eating with others, even in silence, watching the sunrise without needing to calculate wind speed. The silence still followed her. It always would. But for the first time, it didn't feel like a prison. It felt like space. Space where something new might grow. Months later, Matthews was reassigned. On his last day at Camp Liberty, he found her once more in the armory. She stood at attention when he entered, but he waved it off. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said. She nodded. "Good luck, sir." He studied her, then asked, "And you? What will you do?" Her eyes flickered to the Barrett, then back to him. For the first time, a faint smile touched her lips. "I'll keep preparing, but maybe I'll prepare for more than just the next shot." Matthews felt something tighten in his chest. Relief, maybe, or respect. "Valdez," he said softly. "Sometimes dignity doesn't speak, it simply acts. That's what you did. Don't forget." She held his gaze. For the first time, he thought he saw not just a soldier, not just a sniper, but a person reclaiming pieces of herself from the silence. "Thank you, sir." Years later, her file would remain sealed, her missions unspoken. Soldiers would still whisper about the ghost in the armory, the impossible shot, the woman who lived in silence, but the truth was simpler. She was never just a legend, never just a number on a badge. She was a reminder that even in war, even in the shadows of impossible choices, humanity mattered, and sometimes the bravest shot was the one you didn't take. Because in the end, dignity doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't ask for applause. It doesn't cling to medals or numbers. Sometimes, dignity doesn't speak at all. It simply acts.